in 1967, my local church pastor took a PLC, a Pastor Leadership Colloquy course, and figured that I probably should take an RS1. And I finally did that in January of 1968, and took that up in Newark, New Jersey. I was living in the Trenton, New Jersey area at the time. And then I did the local church course in Philadelphia in February, and I was hooked. I became involved with the Philadelphia regional group and began to learn what it might mean to teach RS1, and worked in pedagogy, as we called it, with that group, and then came to the summer program on the west side in Fifth City in the summer of 1968, and then came back for council in August, which was going on at the same time as the Democratic convention and the riots down on downtown was happening at the same time. And when I left that from the end of that council, that council in the fall of 1968, I knew I was going to be back on staff. It just mattered. I just didn't know when. So I had already signed a teaching contract in New Jersey, went back and taught that, and then in April of '69, I applied to be an intern and said that I would also like to go to the academy the summer of 1969, and I was willing to pay my own way to the academy so I could be sure I would go to the academy. So I did that. And then I was in Chicago then on the west side for 2 years, and then went to the Philippines, and then was in the Philippines for 2 years and got assigned to England. And I was in England for 2 years, and then was assigned to go to Kenya, to Nairobi. All the time I was teaching school, so I was doing what we called self-support. I went to the Philippines with Elsa Nelson, Elsa Bengal now. We were both school teachers, and we were going primarily so that our staff in the Philippines would have self-support. At the time we went there was only one staff location in the Philippines, that was in Manila. At that time it was in Old Makati, and we were sharing a house with the Becerra family, with Lowell and Marilyn and their family. We were primarily the religious house was on the second floor, and they were on the first. And over time we moved to Barrio Obrero in the Obrero section of Makati, and lived there. Who was on staff at the time were the Lingos and the Fischels, and Elsa and I, and Linda Estrella. And then we went to, the Quimbys moved as a family they were a guardian family in Japan. They moved to Manila with a company transfer with Union Carbide, and got a lovely house in the Ermita neighborhood, and we all moved into their house as our staff house. And we were primarily in that time, it was during that time right after we moved to Ermita that martial law was declared. And so we all became very frightened. Oh, there's a story. I remember going right after the declaration of martial law, there was a real question about whether we should continue to do the training we were doing all across the Philippines, and or whether that would be restricted. And so there was a hesitancy there for a while right after the declaration of martial law as to whether or not we should do any any training, especially since our new program, let me say that the President Marcos's program on the other side of martial law, he was talking about the new society for the Philippines. And our new course at the time was Living Effectively in the New Society, or our Lens course. So it was like, how do we take a course called Living Effectively in the New Society and market it and do it in a context of martial law and Marcos's New Society. That quandary. And Bob Fischel and I had made a call to the East Asian Pastoral Institute in Quezon City, meeting with a very wise priest by the name of Father Jose Collier, and who was the head of the East Asian Pastoral Institute. And I remember Father Collier saying that he had lived in Mao's China, and he had lived in Marcos's Philippines, and before that he had lived in Franco's Spain. Those three, Franco's Spain, Mao's China, and Marcos's Philippines. And he had learned a long time ago that one's freedom had nothing to do with the political system you happen to find yourself under. And that was just like the freeing statement that let us go ahead and do what we needed to do in the Philippines at that point. Training that we were doing at that time, because this is in the 70s, and we were primarily, most of our authorization in the Philippines had been under the churches. We were there with authorization from the church, and we were seen primarily as local church renewal people. So our training was with churches, with active church leadership, as well as school teachers, primarily, educational methods. And with the churches, it was primarily, the ones I particularly being involved with was, I remember doing a seminar with a Knights of Columbus group, for example, in Quezon City. And they were concerned about how did they serve their parish, the neighborhood. So that was kind of how we made the initial change from when we were doing with how did the church serve the neighborhood around it, the parish, which ultimately became community development projects. But they were, and that was where I learned that you trust the wisdom of local people, because when we raised the question of what were the issues that they were experiencing, one of the first responses in terms of local community issues, somebody stood up and he said he didn't get enough sleep. That was the community issue, and then what he was pointing to was the fact that in the dry season, they were worried about fires, and in the wet season they were about flooding, so that the underlying issue had to do with public services like fire hydrants and a way to deal with fire prevention, or storm drains in the wet season when the rains came. So they knew he had his finger on the issue, but how he articulated it as not enough sleep didn't quite make sense. Had a similar thing happen in Scotland, where problem, in an answer to a question about a problem in the local community, the woman said that the wee green men were too short. And you say, what, the wee green men are too short? And she was talking about the crossing lights for pedestrian crossings, that the green light was not long enough time for seniors to get across the street. So she stated it that the wee green men were too short, which did not make any sense until you went beneath that and got her explanation of what she was talking about. So local people know. They know what their problems are. They know what the issues are. It's just drawing out of them to get them to say what it is.